We are at the final chapter of Book 1 of The Fellowship of the Ring. If this is your first time reading the story, congratulations, you are a sixth of the way through the tale. And if this is your 100th time reading it or 1,000th time reading it, I hope you're having just as much of a fun time enjoying this series as I am. And if you've stumbled upon this video many months or years after it was posted, this is or was part of a Lord of the Rings read-along where we break down pretty much every single chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring. So I hope you're enjoying the story so far. A few videos ago, close to 10 videos ago now, we talked about Elbereth and who Elbereth is and how that would be important later on. Well, in this last chapter, we see the payoff and we get the kind of a little bit of an explanation of that in this chapter. So of course, in the previous chapter, the hobbits are attacked by ringwraiths and Frodo is stabbed, but he also is able to stab back with his blade and say, "Oh, Elbereth Gathoniel." And in this chapter, Aragorn / Strider says that the name Elbereth was kind of very painful to the Black Riders, to the Ringwraiths. And again, the reason for that is because Elbereth is one of the Valar, one of the major gods of Middle-earth. To put it lightly, again, as I said many times, there's much more to it than that. They're not kind of like gods that truly preside over the land as we see in a lot of fantasy stories. But they are definitely higher spirits of the land. And Elbereth is wed to the most powerful Valar. And basically they are some of the epitomes of good in this case. And the Black Riders are, of course, the epitome of evil. People fault Lord of the Rings a lot of times for being very black and white. And yes, there are definitely some very black and white aspects of the story. Sauron is evil. Gandalf is good. There's no question at all there. It's really through the other characters that we get some of the nuances that come across. And we definitely will get that as the story and Two Towers and Return of the King progress as well. There's a lot of conflicted characters and a lot of things that come up. But we do always have good fighting evil there with kind of the gray in the middle. So here, Frodo invoked the name of Elbereth, and that did wound the Black Rider enough to kind of make it so that Frodo didn't get stabbed in the heart, which would have killed him and turned him into a wraith. But in this case, he invoked the name of Elbereth and used his Blade of Westernesse to kind of do a quick, kind of thrust, pitiful as it may be for a hobbit, towards the Black Riders. And you have to remember that the blade that he has was forged particularly to fight against Black Riders. Now, this will come up again later on in the story, so keep that in mind. But in this case, both Frodo invoking the name of Elbereth and swinging his sword towards the Black Riders, that particular blade, whereas normally a normal blade would not have been able to hurt these riders, this particular blade was able to invoke enough damage so that Frodo wasn't killed. So there's a little bit of the history and lore and mythology behind why Frodo was not overwhelmed by these seemingly completely powerful individuals. We also see Aragorn using the plant Athelas to do a little bit of minor healing on Frodo, really to lessen the poison that is in his shoulder wound because of the Black Rider's blade. And this is very important in Return of the King. So be sure to keep in the back of your mind Aragorn and Athelas plants and healing, because it is a major minor plot element later on. And the fact that Aragorn also still has a few of these particular plants lying around. The other thing I want to talk about is stories, because stories once again prove to have healing power. In the last video on the last chapter, we talked about how Strider shared stories of the elder days of Middle-earth with the hobbits and how this lifted their spirits and how it kind of prepared them in a psychological, subconscious way for what was to come next. And now we have in this story, we have the hobbits and Strider stumbling upon the three stone trolls, and they're familiar with that part of the Hobbit. And if you're not for any reason, there was one part of the Hobbit early on in the adventure when Bilbo and the dwarves were captured by these trolls. Now, trolls, as everyone knows, particularly mountain trolls, turn to stone in the daylight. And that's exactly what happened due to kind of a trick that Gandalf played on the trolls. They were caught unawares in daylight and turned to stone. So now we have, 60 plus years later, the hobbits stumbling upon these same stone trolls, and they have this remembrance and recollection in their minds of Bilbo's stories and adventures, and they all are able to laugh a little bit. Even Frodo, who said, Tolkien says Frodo felt his spirits reviving. The reminder of Bilbo's first successful adventure was heartening, and Frodo has been dealt a deadly wound. He's been stabbed by pure evil. The poison is affecting him, but the remembrance of story was enough to lift his spirits. Potentially even more so in a different perspective than the Athelas plants are. The Athelas plants, did physical healing, but the story, the idea of story, the remembrance of a good tale told by a good friend so many years ago was enough to kind of keep him going for just a little bit longer. So as you keep reading Lord of the Rings, I just want you to keep that in mind, the power of story, the healing power of story, and the hope of story. We're left at a little bit of cliffhanger at this point because we know that Frodo was being chased by Black Riders and then crossed the ford and then basically blacked out. So I will leave you there. If you haven't read the story before, I'm sure you're gonna wanna get into the next section as you delve into Book 2 of The Fellowship of the Ring. If you stuck with me this far so well, let me know what your thoughts are on this video series, if there's anything that I could do to try to improve it at all. My goal is to keep these videos, somewhat short, just to give you a few little things to think about, a few little tidbits in the history, the mythology, the lore, whenever possible, a little bit of insight into Tolkien's mind based on the things that he wrote and said later on. So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you soon as we break into part 2 of The Fellowship of the Ring.